The Blocktalk Podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk Podcast with me, Brian Welsh, and Jax Bruce. Jax, how are you? What have you been up to?
Yeah, I'm good. I had a nice weekend. I was out for lunch enjoying the sunshine in one of the rooftop restaurants in Glasgow city centre, which was good. Caught up with friends I hadn't seen for a while, and managed to actually paint one wall in my living room before I went out on Saturday. So it was a relaxing and quite productive weekend as well. How are you? You all right?
Yes. We've had two dogs for the last 10 days. So I was very relieved at 10 o'clock on Sunday night when the one that wasn't ours went home. That was a challenge for me. Never mind. But other than that, it's all good. Okay, so today we have the pleasure in talking to Derk McDonald, who has been on before, and also Alan Draper. But we're going to have a discussion today about EV charging in the property industry. Derk, as you'll know, because he's been on before, is Joint MD at Newton Property Management, and he and his team have been pioneering the installation of EV charging points across their portfolio. Alan is the Director of EV Solutions. Alan is also a member of the Institute of Residential Property Management, with more than 15 years experience in the residential leasehold sector, and prior to this, 15 years in IT. So that's where I came from, so a man from my own heart. So guys, how are you doing? Derk, you good today?
Yeah, doing really good, Brian. Yeah, and I'm glad this heat wave's over. If you want to call it that in Scotland. But good. Yeah, ready to go. Everyone's back from the holidays now, so
good.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Good. And Alan, good to have you on. Thanks very much for coming on and agreeing to this. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Much like Derek, just back from holiday and enjoyed the heat wave. And now back in the office and just trying to catch up on the last 2 weeks.
Holidays are great when you're there, but it's catching up on everything when you get back, isn't it? So Derek, let's come to you first. Could you give listeners a short intro to where Newton is at with EV charging? And then Alan, can you tell us what you're doing just now as well? So Derek, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I think maybe following on from the last chat that we had, so Newton really kind of, took the lead, I think, in the industry a couple of years ago now. We're finding that, the level of interest from our customers in having electric vehicle charging facilities was just rocketing. We could see the trend. We knew we know what's coming down the road, that, you won't be able to buy an ICE car, an internal combustion engine car, new after a certain date. So we really had to be thinking about this, from now, how we're going to deal with it. Some of the legal challenges that Scottish property factors have are pretty well documented, but I'm sure we'll talk about this later on. I'm really fascinated to hear from Alan, to hear what the challenges are for his neck of the woods. But we realised a couple of years ago that if the only way that we were going to be showing our customers, what the benefits would be to having an electric car would be, it's chicken and egg. You got to put in a charging unit.
Yeah.
So we piloted a scheme where Newton used their own money initially to install charging units in our customers' developments with their permission. Obviously, that's extremely important. Barrel in there and say, "Hey guys, here's a charging unit for you." But through that process, we showed that there's a practical solution to it, at least in the short term. It deals with the immediate demand, and it's helping our customers get mobile in a more environmentally friendly way than they were before. Although, we appreciate, gosh, the more you read about it, there's still environmental concerns about electric cars. The cost of production, the tires, etc., all this kind of stuff. But generally speaking, we really took the view that, look, if we can kind of grab the bull by the horns here, and we can get these things in, then we'll show the owner. And as a result of that, we're now, I think, in the industry known as being the guys that can do attitude. And we're seeing more of these things going in it. And actually, just about a month ago, I think we had our latest passive charging system that went in a development in the West End here that we helped the owners to put into it. So we're delighted to be involved in it, but there's so much more to do, and the industry and our customers really need some help here to get these things rolled out. And we're keen to make sure that somebody living in a flat is not a disadvantage to somebody living in a house with off-street parking.
Yeah, sure. No, I totally agree with that. Alan, do you want to just give us a kind of a short intro as to where you and EVE are at the moment?
Yes. So EV Solutions Group it's a consultancy that actually advises leaseholders and particularly property managers on how to get electrical vehicle charging infrastructure retrofitted into their developments. Now, my background is that I'm actually a property manager, and I own a property management agency, Common Ground Estate and Property Management.
Right.
And a few things sort of aligned around 18 months ago, where Common Ground actually won the contract to manage a development of nearly 200 units in Oxford. That development is actually owned by the Lucy Electric Group, and I think most property managers will have probably seen Lucy Electric kit in their development somewhere. They were very keen to implement 150 electrical vehicle charging points into the car park at this development. The leaseholders were by and large on board with the idea, and it was something that I was interested in personally. I'm a bit of an IT nerd personally. I wouldn't call myself a nerd, but I'm definitely in touch with my inner geek. I bought an electric vehicle about 18 months ago.
Okay. Is it fully electric? Yeah. It's
fully electric. Yeah. You seriously have to go and test drive one because they are absolutely great fun. I still drive it like I stole it because yeah. And so I bought it's a Tesla 18 months ago, and one of the reasons for me buying it is there's the environment thing, but also in the UK there's tax advantages. So there's no benefit in kind tax on electric cars at the moment. Yeah. So increasingly people are being offered electric cars through their employers. Yeah. And I thought, well, I need a new car, and that was it. And then at the same time, we were appointed to manage the development in Oxford, and they were sort of struggling to get the infrastructure in place and go through all of the various things. And it just became a bit of an obsession, really. I kind of looked into the whole thing, and I saw, all of the various obstacles that are in the way. And we were consulting with the leaseholders at the development in Oxford. It's actually called the Eagle Works in Oxford. Okay. And it became obvious that it was a really, really complex problem to solve, in that you've got, the leases that you have to deal with, there's electrical infrastructure, then there's actually managing the leaseholders themselves. Even if you get the electrical infrastructure into the development, you've also then got to bill it, because if you run it off the communal supply, you've then got to recharge that. But I think the biggest single obstacle that we found particularly is the leases. I got my head really into this, and rather than answer hundreds and hundreds of questions from the leaseholders of the Eagle Works. I actually published a couple of articles on the Common Ground website based on my research into this, and that led to an approach by the Institute of Residential Property Management, initially to do a white paper on the piece. And for about 4 months after that, I was sort of getting up at 5 a.m. and working through until about 8, just solidly researching this piece. I absolutely loved doing it. But the 6 or 7 pages that the Institute of Residential Property Management were expecting ended up being about 28, so it was rebranded as a thought piece.
Okay.
And in the interim, I've a good friend of mine, Ken Ingram. I was talking to him about it, and we both realised that property managers actually needed help with this, because there's no sort of out of the box solution for any development. Everything is going to be bespoke. So we formed EV Solutions Group just under a year ago, and we launched formally at the Institute of Residential Property Management annual seminar in May, and I was a presenter there. And the interest has been huge. It's exceeded our expectations. So I appreciate that I was asked to do a summary, and I feel like I've overstayed my time on that. So that's where we're at.
No, it's good to get some background from you and what you've been doing and where you've come from. I especially like the inner geeky comment. I come from when I started life as a developer. I suppose you could call me a tech. But not much these days, I would have said. Derek, you drive a fully electric car now as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. And I suppose, similar to a lot of people that get into electric cars, you're kind of, there's a kind of progression to that. So yeah. I started off 3 years ago. I moved to had a petrol car, and then I went to a plug-in hybrid. So there was an all-electric range of about 30 miles. And listening to the comments about geeks, I mean, I just love all this stuff. So if I do something, Brian, as you know, I do it properly. Mm-hmm. So my objective was to run this thing on electric as often as possible. Sure. And to the extent I actually wore the battery out.
Oh wow!
They had to replace the battery under warranty, because I was just using it, and I think I got. I think the longest time between top-ups of the petrol was about nearly 6 months.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, so I did that, and then got the bug, and I thought, gosh, because your performance is always limited when you're running purely an electric on a plug-in. Yeah. And as Alan was saying there, the opportunity came. I'm fortunate enough that it's a company car, and that there's incredible tax benefits at the moment. So, sure. As indeed all of our directors at the moment are moving over to electric, and I went fully electric in April. But there was a horrendous delay, post-COVID and everything for the car. And I know that's a major frustration for a lot of folk that are waiting for an electric car, because the demand is so high. Yeah. That if they're told, right, it's going to be an 18-month lead time for it, they say, oh, no, I'm not interested in that, and I'll just go for a standard petrol or a diesel car, and it's kind of creating a bit of a ripple in the market. But I certainly, and don't get me wrong, electric cars at the moment, they're becoming more affordable, and the second-hand market is developing. Sure. But they're still. It's not on a pound for pound basis for a petrol vehicle. Yeah. So I'm in a very fortunate position that I'm able to do that just now. But I genuinely hope that the more electric cars are seen on the road, and what the government did a couple of years ago by mandating or encouraging the green tag on the license plate. I thought Yeah. So you can spot an electric car a mile off now, and the more you see of them, the more people are getting familiar with them. And there's a real economic argument, more than just the kind of the taxational benefits. I mean, the running costs, with petrol and diesel skyrocketing, it becomes even with electricity costs going up, there's still a massive cost benefit there for running one. And, the more that people see that, hopefully the better. One thing, and this is maybe a bit of a side issue, but one thing that we've noticed in terms of our customer attitude to electric cars is you've got the kind of the early adopters. So these are customers that are, they're technology wise, they're into something, the Tesla geek, if you like, that really, wants to get behind the product or, the technology. But there's also a significant number of our customers that we've noticed, maybe a certain demographic, maybe it's an age-related thing, not always, but sometimes, that are quite apprehensive about electric vehicles. And, if there's a story out there about, electric vehicles spontaneously combusting, this will be something that they'll point to and say, oh, well, maybe they're not safe, but, there's so much in my mind that positives about electric vehicles that massively outweigh the downsides at the moment, unless we find out something about them later on. But there definitely is a perception issue, and we also think, because people are we're creatures of habit. If you think about, if you've spent your entire working life, running a petrol or a diesel car, you've got that rhythm in your life. You've got that. You get your monthly pay, you go to the supermarket, maybe like once every 2 weeks, you fill the car up as part of your routine. And actually, I think sometimes when people are thinking about getting an electric car, because it does require an adjustment in the way that you use these things and the way that you run them, it sometimes, there can be a bit of hesitation about, well, I'll actually need to change my routine. But I can assure anyone listening to this, it's such a small adjustment, particularly if you've got the benefit of off-street parking. So, if you're lucky enough to come home, plug the car in, which is what we're trying to help customers do in their flats. You just come home, plug it in, top it up to 80%, because that's the max you're supposed to do if you're running regularly. And it just becomes so easy and stress-free. And driving an electric car, listening to Alan's comments there about, driving it like you stole it. It's, you've got the fun factor, it puts a smile on your face, but it's also incredibly relaxing, particularly because there's no gearing in them. And it's just a joy. So anyone thinking about getting one, go and test drive one. You don't have to go for the £100,000 Tesla like Alan's got. Wink.
All 100,000. And I know what you drive, so let's not go there.
No. But it really is an experience, and definitely the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, I tell you, I need to ask this question because I have a twin brother, and he lives in Scotland as well, and he does a huge amount of work, Nottingham, maybe down kind of Hampshire way. And does range anxiety actually exist?
I'll go first, Alan.
Okay.
Yes, it does when you first get the car,
right?
Because it takes a bit of time to figure out what the plan is if you're going on a longer journey. But the main arterial routes in the UK now are so well serviced. I mean, there are apps, using out your smartphone, telling you where, all of the charge points are, and a lot of these apps tell you whether a charge point's occupied or not. And so many of these charge points now are the public charging. It's you just need to tap your debit card on it now instead of actually signing up. So it's just becoming so much easier. I think a couple of weeks after I got my latest car, we've got a couple of offices, one in Aberdeen, one in Inverness. So I just so happened to have, I wasn't looking for an excuse, something to do in both offices in 2 consecutive days. And it really wasn't. I think I topped up twice, one of which there's a new Ionity charging station at Perth. And that thing is unbelievable. I mean, honestly, I went in, I think it went in with 30% in the car. There's a little Starbucks next to it. So I went in there and I got a cup of tea and a biscuit, and I was in there for 20 minutes, and I came back out and it was like 90%. It's actually unbelievable. So, the anxiety, you have a little bit of anxiety, but it's to do with this adjustment in the way that you think.
I was going to say that. And what about you, Alan? You drive well, I don't know if you drive, you probably don't drive the same Tesla, you probably drive a better one, but my brother is a Tesla driver. And and I did phone him the other day when I was coming up from Southampton, and I was on the M6, and he was coming up the East Coast on the A1, and he stopped for dinner at the Holiday Inn at Scotch Corner to charge his car so that he could make it back to Scotland. I guess it is just an adjustment, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a very similar story to Derek in that, I mean, for me, range anxiety isn't such a big thing because I generally don't do more than about 100 to 150 miles in a day.
Right, okay.
But then there was an occasion I had to take my mother on a fairly long journey that exceeded the range of the vehicle in it was a day trip. And I'm sorry, but this is where my inner geek is just bursting to come out and tell you this story. I basically put the coordinates into the sat nav of the car. We got on the motorway. I put the car onto autopilot, which works really, really well on the motorway. As we're driving up the M40, a lorry pulls out in front of me, and I didn't see it because I was sat gassing to my mother. And the car picked it up far quicker than I would have done, put the brakes on, and that was it. So the car pretty much drove us all the way to our destination, which I think was Wolverhampton that day. We went to the event that we were going to, and then on the way back, I put the route in. The car actually told me where to stop. And when we got to, I think it was Warwick Services, we got in there, we stopped for a coffee, and after 20 minutes, the car texts me and says, yeah, we've got enough to go home now.
Wow.
Back in the car, self-drive, drink my coffee. It was a fantastic experience. And I think it also leads on to the fact that when I got the Tesla, I'd never really researched electric vehicles. And I mentioned this in the white paper. I just hadn't really fully invested in it. And it was actually my accountants did a sort of spoof Top Gear video. Call out to Matt Williams here because it's a fantastic video where he sort of tries to do it in the style of Top Gear. So, he's a wannabe Jeremy Clarkson, and he's basically doing this review of a Jaguar I-Pace. And I thought, what's he doing here? And then he basically came to it and said, well, the whole point of me doing this is that there's no benefit in kind tax on fully electric vehicles. And immediately I sprung up. I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. And at that point, I then properly started looking into electric vehicles. And all my sort of previous prejudices about them melted away. The range on mine's the bog standard Tesla. It's not the £100,000 one that I'd really like. It's going to be less than that, I can assure you. But the standard range on that's 250 miles. You get a long range one up to 350. And really the electric vehicles, are starting to match petrol or diesel cars in terms of range. So, all my prejudices went away, and I decided, right, I've got to go and test drive one. I was bored one Saturday, sat with my daughter, and I said, oh, should we go and test drive one? We got down to the centre, got in this car, reversed it out, and it was eerily quiet. And we looked at one another and thought, gosh, this is strange. Got it on the dual carriageway, put my foot down, my head hit the back of the seat, same with my daughter. And my daughter just turned to me and said, Daddy, you've got to get one of these. And I was just, yeah. And that was it. I ordered it 2 days later and took delivery 6 weeks later.
Wow. I must admit, I have been in a business partner of mine in my other business. Her husband has... it's the ludicrous one, ludicrous mode or something like that. And he took me out in it, and I felt as if my throat was crushing when he accelerated. It was scarily fast. Yeah.
In ludicrous mode, what it does in the Tesla, you put it onto ludicrous mode, and then it gives you two options. It says, "Are you sure?" Press yes. No, I want my mummy. So Elon Musk.
I did not know that. Yeah, to be fair, actually, and Derek and I have had this conversation before, because the car that Derek had that he needed to replace the battery, I had one of them as well, and it only did about 20 miles, I think, on battery, as if I recall. The company car tax was not hugely beneficial on it. It was possibly better than most, but not hugely beneficial. But actually, the damn thing broke down all the time, so I sent it back after 2 years. And I now have a hybrid, and I can get, I think, about 55 out of mine. So going to work and home. If I come into the office, I don't need fuel. I just put it in electric mode. But you're right. There's a performance kind of constraint when doing that. But I don't have charging point in my house. I literally drive it around the back of the house. I have an external 13 amp socket. I plug that in the car, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, I get a text to say it's charged. But that's all I need, because I have fuel as well to go on my way. But yeah, I to be perfectly honest, this is on a 3-year lease. So how long have I had it? I've only had it for 4 or 5 months. But I would have thought the next one will be fully electric. Yeah, because technology in cars over 3 years it takes leaps and bounds. Yeah. So, okay, so I suppose we might get back to talking about property management rather than cars. So Derek, I'll come to you first. Where do you think EV charging is heading within the industry?
I think we need to kind of split it into kind of two independent areas. There's EV charging for new build properties.
Yep.
And EV charging for properties where there's a demand from the owners to retrofit. So I think EV charging for new build properties, we're already seeing this, that most, well, it depends when they were actually green lit, but most new build blocks of flats that are going up now are going in with the infrastructure there ready. So they don't have the electronics installed, but the cable, the basic cabling is going in, the cable runs, so it's ready for a system to go in. I actually think the next step in the evolution of this, with the demand rising, is, I think, you will see at the moment, we've only seen, I think, a couple in Scotland where the developer's gone the whole hog, and these are very high-end properties, one of which we don't manage, which is through in Edinburgh, and I was very fortunate to be shown that by the developer quite recently, where they have installed, the whole system, with the exception of the actual charging point for each individual car, because you have to subscribe to get into that.
Yep.
But I do think that we'll see, over the next short while, the next few years, developers seeing that there's actually, a benefit. Obviously, there's a cost to them for having, a plug-and-play solution, but I think this is coming, and it'll relieve the owners of a massive headache, no doubt. The flip side of that, the other one is the retrofit. We're doing what we can. We're working with owners where we can, where we think we can get a consensus. But it really, we're going to have to see, some significant legislative changes to make the decision making more democratic. Because at the moment it isn't, and we can maybe get into that a little bit later with Alan. I'm really fascinated to hear, what restrictions are on people in England, especially on that. But there's definitely, what I can tell you is that the demand is definitely growing exponentially, and we've got to, as property managers, we've got to educate ourselves. We've got to know, what the technology is. We've got to know what the simplest way to deploy it is, how to navigate the legal impediments, and to make sure that we're providing as good a service to our customers as possible, and a service that they absolutely demand. And it does frustrate me a wee bit. You do hear stories of customers who are customers of other property managers where, because the other property managers maybe haven't had any experience of it, and they point to the title deeds in a development, and they say, no, we can't do it, and they just don't help. And I don't think that's really the way to go. I think education is key, and explaining if you can't do something, why you can't do it, but what you maybe could do, and what the owners could do. There's always a way to do it at the moment, but I think as we get into this later on, we'll have a couple of suggestions for how in Scotland we can overcome the legal hurdles.
Okay, we'll hold on to that, folks. There's a couple of questions coming up, as you've said, that we can talk about with that. So, from your point of view, Alan, where do you think EV charging is heading within the industry?
In the white paper that I did for the IRPM, we've actually we put a couple of checklists in there that property managers can use. We see it as being two distinct markets where you'll have your early adopters, the leaseholders that want something now, and there are things that we can do that we can put in place to allow a certain number of leaseholders to be able to connect maybe to a communal electricity supply. But then once you've gone past the limits of the incoming electrical supply, then you are looking at a site-wide scheme. So we see it
Sure.
in that way. There's going to be early adopters, people with electric cars right now. There isn't the funds there to put in a site-wide scheme, and then that will then eventually progress on to a site-wide scheme. Derek also mentioned about new build and retrofit. So EV Solutions is very much dealing with the kind of retrofit things. That's absolutely our speciality. But also in terms of new build as well. Certainly in England, we're seeing a lack of joined up thinking, and we are talking to the Office for Zero Emissions Vehicles about this. In that we, through the managing agency Common Ground, we have a development, a new build that we manage. And part of the planning requirement for that was that they had to put an electric charger into the development. There's 9 flats at this development. So what they've done, just to go to fulfill the planning requirements, they've stuck a single charger in there and they've connected it to the communal supply. So the first person that gets an electric vehicle is basically going to be getting electricity that they're paying for. Or contributing towards. So there is a lack of joined up thinking, and the government needs to look at this and take a big picture view on it.
Yeah. I mean that's just legislation for or the planning requirement is just it is just a tick in the box kind of thing in that scenario, isn't it? So,
yeah, but what's going to happen is that's it's going to have to be ripped out at some point, and they're probably going to have to upgrade the incoming supply, and that's quite a few £1,000 in reality has just been wasted just to comply with the planning application.
Yeah. Okay. So just sticking with you then, Alan, you can have this one first. What support do you think the industry needs?
The biggest problem that property managers are going to face is that they are not going to be. It just isn't in their day to day, and there's an awful lot of different technologies out there. There's a million and one ways to solve the various technical issues and legal issues that come up as part of any installation of an EV charger. The government, I think, will need to legislate, because in cases where you've got an absolute prohibition on improvements, and that's a lot of leases, then in reality, to be able to get EV charging infrastructure implemented, you've got to amend all of those leases, and that will require agreement of all parties. And I think the government needs to deal with that, because it's going to leave a lot of leaseholders unable to actually install this infrastructure.
Okay. And Derek, what support does the industry need?
Yeah. I mean, along the lines of what Alan was saying, I think we've got to be careful when we're talking about what support the industry needs in Scotland. Okay, we're the ones that help facilitate this, but it's actually the owners, the property owners that will be the ultimate beneficiary of it, and it's actually them that are creating the demand. So I would say that it's the support that the property owners need. Decoding for Alan, the equivalent of the kind of the leaseholders. What support do they need from the property manager, and also from the party that ultimately decides what is going to be possible, and that's the legislature. And what can they deal with it? But I certainly think, if you look at the bodies that we deal with, Alan had mentioned OZEV. They're coming forward now. There was a new grant structure that was launched, I think, was it April or May this year, Alan?
It was April. Yeah.
With actually, at face value, a very generous grant funding proposal, but obviously subject to, there's caveats there, but maximum cap for the building, etc.
Yeah.
But also the Energy Saving Trust. I mean, they've been really fantastic. We deal with their Edinburgh office, and they've been really good, helpful, first name terms with the guys in there. Advice and just generally. I mean, I remember we went through. Oh gosh, this was actually good. Time flies, guys, doesn't it? Before post lockdown, post COVID, pre-COVID rather. We went through there with some customers of ours, and we spent a couple of hours with them, and just talking through. And this was a really, I guess, the first one of the first passive retrofit installations that we're looking at. And they were really helpful, and they really pointed us and the owners in the right direction. And as a result of that, within a few months, we had the scheme fully planned out, measured and costed. So that was really excellent. And I think, the property managers need to be kind of less apprehensive about reaching out to these kind of agencies, particularly the EST, because it's actually, in their interest to help get these things in as well, because the more successful they are, ultimately, the more funding that they'll get for it. So I think, let's all just try and work together on this.
Yeah. Okay. Useful. So Alan, you wrote a paper which you've mentioned a number of times for the Property Institute. Used to be, the amalgamation of IRPM and ARMA. And something that caught my attention when I read it was that fire hazards, for obvious reasons, and also the need for updated compliance. Can you tell us more about your thoughts on that?
Yes, my understanding is that with respect to car fires, the data that they use in terms of fire safety, excuse me while I clear my throat, is that it's based on a 1960s car.
Oh wow! Okay.
If on the rare occasions that electric vehicles do catch fire, they are self-seeding, so they don't need an oxygen supply, and they can go on for hours. And I think there was a case earlier this year, or maybe late last year, in the United States where a Tesla caught fire. It needed 32,000 gallons of water to put it out.
Wow.
So
Okay.
there is that. I think it is very rare, but it's something that I think would need to be taken into consideration, that possibility in terms of fire safety regulations.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. That is quite a long time. So Derek, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know that we're seeing this being commented on fire assessments when there's slightly different setup in Scotland to England in terms of requirement to do FRAs, but normally you'll find if there's an FRA being done, it's normally an insurer that asks for it. So we are seeing these things being commented on, and it's almost at the moment it's a kind of cut and paste. But be aware, if there's electric vehicles in there. But I don't know too much about this, but I'm guessing the risk from an electrical fire from an electric vehicle comes when the batteries are being stimulated, for want of a better word. Yeah. So if you have vehicles in a passive charging network, they're all going to be, maybe with the odd exception, they're going to be cranking away maximum 7 kilowatts. So it's not a rapid charge situation. It's not, you're not plugging them into one of these massive superchargers that's, that you're getting 200 kilowatts an hour or anything like that. So I'm guessing, and I did see a video of a car on fire, and it was next to a rapid charger. So I'm kind of putting the two things together. But yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a requirement to be aware of this, this situation. But as Alan said, the instances of this are pretty rare, and this comes back to my point as well that I was making earlier on. That when customers are apprehensive about something, they will maybe gravitate towards the negative side of things, even though it's a fairly rare or unusual thing to happen. But and I do think actually the this is probably more of a technical point, but the battery technology that we've got at the moment is set to change. There's great strides coming with solid state batteries, and different materials that are being used in them, all of which require there to be less heat in the battery. And I think as we're getting through the next kind of decade, I think that the instances of these kind of fires will be less as the technology changes for it as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, tech moves so quickly in every aspect that these days, doesn't it? So, I mean, you would think that would be at the forefront of any future advances to I mean, it sounds like it's very rare anyway, but to keep it to an absolute minimum. So, okay, cool. That's very useful. Sorry, do you want to come back on anything on that, Alan? Or
Yes, I think the bigger risk really in terms of fire is people plugging hybrids into trickle chargers. So I've seen this at a number of developments that EV Solutions is helping. We'll go to a development, we'll see a number of cars plugged into a 13 amp socket with their trickle chargers. And in a couple of cases, I saw extension leads and 2 trickle chargers going through this one extension lead through this 13 amp socket. And I just thought, oh, crikey, I obviously had to mention it there and then. And I think that's probably the bigger risk. I think once you've got the infrastructure in there, the risks are extremely low. But and as well, trickle charges, presenting trip hazards.
We it's a funny story about that, Alan. We ran a campaign previously through one of the kind of national newspapers up here, and we had to produce content for it, fairly regularly. And it was actually, we got a call from customers in actually a really nice development just outside of Glasgow. And it was the cleaning contractor. And she said, quite broad Glasgow accent, I don't know if I can do it, but she said, "Can I unplug the car?" So, what do you mean? She said, "Oh, the communal socket on one of the landings, someone's got a cable trailing out to their car, like literally, 30 yards, out the window. This was the second floor, down across the courtyard to their car." So my answer was that, yes, of course you can unplug the car. They shouldn't be using the common electricity, and they need to find a better solution for it. But as a result of that, part of the story, we mocked up a photograph. We actually did it here at the office because we've got a car park at the back, where we had it was a multi-gang socket, and we had 5 or 6 plugs plugged into it, and each of the plugs had a label on it. It was like Tesla, Jaguar, to kind of say this potentially this is what can happen, and there's electrical obviously overload issue, and also the physical trip hazard as these things go through, and I think we've got a situation here now where the tax advantages are now so strong that if you are given the option for through your company car scheme to take an electric car or a internal combustion car, you're probably, if you think there's a way of handling that and charging it regularly, you might be prepared to take that risk, and I think that's really something, and it's certainly conversation that we have with our customers about the potential concerns there from having cables trailing down pipe runs, etc., through a development. So yeah, I agree, it's really something. And what you want to have in a development is a system that everybody looks at, knows it has to be maintained, but it's a known quantity, and everyone using it in a uniform way.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I have to say before you ask that that I do plug mine into a proper external 13 amp socket, and there is no trip hazard. Although, having said that, my other half is getting a hybrid Mini Countryman. Well, actually, it was due last November. I think it's finally coming this November, and I'm going to have to find a way to charge that because because our car's parked around the front of the house and there are no external sockets there, so I'm going to have to get something put in there. But yes, and also your attempt at a Glasgow accent was atrocious. But so just to actually, to be fair, I have to say I saw a documentary years and years ago, and it was all about electric vehicles. And it was about electric vehicles on business leases going back, and the charging cables had not come out of the wrappers. Yeah, but the taxation on cars in this country is, has been going up and up and up over the years. That people see it as a way to jump in and do it. But I certainly think nowadays they take advantage of the charging as well. But I think 5-6 years ago it was just a way to beat the tax. Yeah, certainly the taxation on my hybrid, because I can't remember what the actual cut-off point down, you maybe even know it's over 45 or over 50 miles or something like that. You then move to another tax bracket. And mine, fortunately, does that. So actually, the tax breaks on my car are phenomenal. Yeah, not zero, but it's less than 100 quid a month to run that car, whereas its diesel alternative is eye-watering. Yeah. So just last question. This has been really, really useful. Last question. We've actually covered a bit of this, but Alan, do you want to take this one first? Do you think the industry needs to work together on this to make it happen, or will it take legislation to make things happen? Because we all know how long it takes to get legislation through.
I think it's both, really. There isn't something you can pull out of a box and just take into a site. Every site is going to have its unique challenges. One of the things that is going to be a big challenge with a lot of sites, and it's a bit like broadband, really. I don't know, where I live in Henley-on-Thames, we've got fibre right to my front door, so I've got really good Wi-Fi. But for years it was fibre to the exchange, and then the last 100 meters of it was on a copper cable, so you lost a lot of those performance gains. And it's much the same with the electricity grid. So in terms of the high voltage side of that, when we're all driving electric cars, there's no problems. It will actually cope with that. We've actually seen since 2006, I think it is, an actual decrease in the amount of electricity that we're using. The problem comes when you're looking to go from the local substation or the local transformer to getting that the required supply to charging points. So what we are anticipating is that a number of developments where we're putting in EV charging infrastructure is that we'll have to actually upgrade the electricity supply as well.
Sure. Yeah.
If you take most developments, say a small block of 10 flats, something like that, you'll have a communal supply generally in those types of development, but it'll be rated at 100 amps.
Yeah.
And you need 30 amps, a separate 30 amp spur to come off that to be able to go to an EV charger. So realistically, and assuming that there's minimal services coming off that, you're probably restricted to 2 chargers, and as a consequence, you're almost certainly going to have to upgrade that supply to allow all leaseholders access to electric vehicle charging. So that's the big problem. One of the advantages that leaseholders will have, because I think leaseholders get a bit of a raw deal compared to freeholders, is that I've got a charger at home and it's 7.4 kilowatts.
Yep.
And I'm going to max out at that because I've got it coming off a 13 amp spur, and that's probably, I might be able to go to an 11.4 kilowatt charger at some point. On larger developments where you've got a 3-phase electricity supply coming in, it might be that 22 kilowatt charging is available for a number of leaseholders. So there might actually be some advantages to being a leaseholder on a number of developments.
Okay, that's
it's nice that they actually get something. I could get on my soapbox here about the leasehold system and the common hold system, but this is probably not the appropriate format for that.
We could do that another day. Another day. So Derek, just coming to you on that one, do you think the industry needs to work together on this, or do you think legislation is going to be what's needed to make it happen?
I think the industry does need to work together on it, but I think there's going to be a kind of, the penny's going to drop on this. And I think once, in terms of the legislation, I think once it becomes apparent that there's less downsides to passing legislation, whereas previously, when it's just the early uptakers, you can understand that, that if the majority of someone's constituents, thought that this wasn't needed and was maybe being imposed on them.
Yeah, sure.
But what was interesting was the Scottish Parliament had a really positive, interesting debate back in, I think it was the 19th of January, and the debate was about retrofitting older properties. So it looked at, a whole load of different issues, to do with insulation in older buildings, etc. But there was an MSP who stood up and made a couple of really interesting points. But so in Scotland, the way that the title deeds are structured is that it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to install something into a building that wasn't there already. Okay. Because the idea is that when you buy into a property, you kind of what's there. You've got a door entry system, you've got controlled access gates, you get this and you get that. So there's a known quantum there about what you're going to have to repair, maintain, and pay for. So if you go to put something new into a building that wasn't there before, other than a couple of really not very straightforward legal mechanisms, you're really looking for everyone to agree to that.
Yeah.
So if you've got a block of 20 flats, and even if the majority of the owners of the flats want to get that charging facility in, just one or two owners, or even one owner, could say no, and then that's it. It doesn't go ahead unless you go down this kind of protracted legal route. So it was interesting watching that debate and the MSP saying, "Look, is this really fair? Is this really the way that it's going to go?" And we are, as property managers, as factors, we're great believers in democracy. Our business is built on ensuring that whenever we do something, that there's a consensus. The majority of the owners, give or take. The odd exception, according to the title deeds, want something to happen. So we think, in terms of the Scottish situation, I'm interested to hear, Alan, what the legislation says down south. But there's actually a relatively straightforward fix to this, we think, and this is it. So we've got a piece of legislation in Scotland called the Tenements Act. Yeah. The Tenements Act talks about how owners of blocks of flats get together and make decisions about how they're going to maintain the building. Now, buried within that act, there's one exception to this if you want to put something new into a building. And the one exception is if you want to install a door entry system. So the Tenements Act is not just about old, in Glasgow, it'd be a sandstone tenement or whatever. It's actually about all blocks of flats, but it recognises that there's a tangible benefit to the owners for their safety and security. So if you don't have a controlled door entry system, just the majority of the owners can decide to install that. And that's a new thing that goes in, and that then binds all the owners into that. So we think that because the legislation that's been around for a good time now has already established that principle, we think that the legislation could be easily adjusted to include for any installation that's going to improve the environmental efficiencies of the property, whether that's EV charging or solar panels or whatever. Yeah. So we know that this is something that can be done. It just depends whether anyone's willing to take that on board and say, okay, for the greater good, for the greater benefit, is this something that we're willing to look at changing? And I think if and when the change is made, I think particularly in Scotland, you'll see a massive uptake of these things, because a lot of the frustration is, well, if there's someone really, really against this, there's really no point. And democracy it really has to be everything. There's also a side issue to do with affordability, which is definitely something that is going to be an issue. But as we can see with issues like the OZIV grants, coming through, it's certainly going to make it much more affordable. So we think there is a relatively quick and easy fix in Scotland that would revolutionise this. It just depends whether it's going to get picked up and actioned.
Right. Okay. And Alan, do you think there's similarly a quick fix for England, or is it much more complicated?
No, it's considerably more complicated. At the moment, I think most of the developments that we're working on with EV solutions, it's very much, it's a bit like enfranchisement, in that, it's those that want to participate are having to fund those that don't. Right. And then those that want to come in at a later date will have to buy into that. The biggest issues we face legally are, when there's the lease basically has a prohibition on these things, but even where you've got sweeper clauses that will allow for alterations, unfortunately, you're still probably looking at licenses to alter, and you also then have to define, how you collect the monies to actually maintain these systems, and that is going to mean that the government has recognised the fact that there's infrastructure costs, and there's the grants for those I think it's £350 towards each individual charger, and £500 towards the infrastructure costs for each car parking space. What the government hasn't recognised is that there's going to be a tremendous legal bill for any development that wants to do this and wants to do it in such a way that they don't then prejudice people trying to sell their properties, because I see it in the not too distant future that somebody's going to see electrical vehicle charging infrastructure on a set of accounts, and some sharp-eyed solicitor is going to say, well, actually the lease doesn't cover this. So I do think the government needs to legislate. I mean, they're already sort of going in that direction, and I think there's some legislation that's been proposed or even going through, where if a development is going through major development work, then they have to look at installing EV charging infrastructure. But it doesn't go far enough. I think the government has to bring in legislation that will override certain conditions in leases. Another major problem, we've obviously got the leasehold system in this country, and where you've got independent freeholders, there is no legal obligation for them to provide access rights over common land. So that is a problem as well. So the legal side is probably the biggest single issue. The second biggest issue is the actual electricity supply in a lot of cases. But the third big issue is the cat herding. And is everybody familiar with the term cat herding?
You could explain for me.
Sounds fascinating.
It's so Roger Hardwick, who's the solicitor that I did the presentation with the Institute of Residential Property Management. I've known him for a number of years, and whenever there's an enfranchisement, trying to get everybody to sort of put their money in, it's a difficult process, and we refer to it as cat herding, because you can imagine it's extremely difficult to herd cats, and it's much the same thing here. And I think the biggest challenge that property managers will have with their developments is when they get these inquiries, where do you start? Do you start with the lease? Do you start with the electricity supply? Do you look at the technology, what's available? And that's where that's fundamentally the need that EV Solutions is addressing, in that we are actually able to give property managers reports and give them a starting point for debate with the leaseholders, and to hopefully make that cat herding process a little bit easier.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that does sound like. Sorry, Derek. When you go.
It does sound like it's a bit of a walk in the park up here compared to what you've got. I'm sure there's real nuances to what we do, but wow, that sounds like you've got a real. And I think you're dead right. That kind of deadlock is only going to get broken by the government stepping in and creating additional legislation that's just going to free all that situation up.
Yeah. Certainly does sound like it.
Yeah, and then of course you've got to bill for the electricity as well, because we're not anticipating that the distribution network operators are going to look to install a new meter for every electrical vehicle charging point that's going in. And that's something that has to be looked at as well. So in a lot of developments, I think you're going to have to look at installing Wi-Fi systems alongside any electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, because most chargers these days are what's called OCPP compliant, and they will basically spit out information including how much electricity is being used. And from, if they're able to do that and there's a Wi-Fi network, then you can actually implement a billing system as well.
Wow, lots to think about. Well, Alan, thanks very much for that, for all that info. Derek, do you have anything before we close?
No. I just think it's been absolutely fascinating, and I think particularly in Scotland, watch this space. I think we're on the hopefully on the verge of making a big change up here. That's going to be again, I use the word, will democratize, the way that these decisions are taken. So, the more the industry educates itself, the better the position that we'll be in to help, owners in these developments. And there's also there's I think one thing we haven't really discussed here is the added value that will go into these properties, and and hopefully, persuading, new property owners that, it's perfectly plausible to own an apartment and have the same utility out of that as a house with off-street parking.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I mean, imagine buying an electric vehicle and then wanting to move to a bigger flat, and your current flat has EV charging and the new one doesn't. You're not going to buy it, are you? So fair, very, very fair point. Alan, anything just before we end from you?
Yes, actually, just where you've made the point about moving from one flat and going to a bigger flat. As any property manager in the UK, I don't know if you have the same in Scotland, but we have the LPE1 format, where somebody's transferring a property. As property managers, we're asked to fill in those forms. I would anticipate in the next few years that there are going to be questions added about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and those questions, if people haven't taken heed of the legal side and what's in the lease and made the appropriate changes, they're going to get caught out when it comes to sale of properties.
Yeah, very, very much.
Did I not see an article a couple of weeks ago, Alan? I think it was fairly well publicised in the national press, and it was a leaseholder that was about to move on, and it might have been like a main door flat, and it installed just a home charger, 7 kilowatt charger, and he was told to remove it. Pretty sure it was something like that. And he was saying, "Well, hold on a minute. I've installed this. I'm not looking to take it with me. It's for the benefit of the next, the next leaseholder." But he was told to take it off anyway.
Likely because he was in. I haven't seen the case. I've been sunning myself in France for the last 2 weeks, but it's in all likelihood he's been in breach of the provisions of the lease, and as such he's been asked to remove it.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, no, it is. Well, gents, thank you very much. That's been hugely interesting and a great subject matter to cover. And maybe we should come back in a year's time or a bit more and see how much has moved on from there as well, because these things they need to move quickly. And I suppose the last I'd say is I hope one day I can afford to buy electric cars like you guys have got. Never mind. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks very much.